Prime Minister Manley.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
May I begin by saying that it's a great honor to be invited here and on this occasion. I have never been quite clear why I made the mistake of departing your profession for the one that I now have. I suppose I must be in some way a glutton for punishment. I've also got to apologize to you because if my voice sounds strange, it is because I have been, shall I say, politically maladroit in coming down with an attack of flu when I have the opportunity of my life, which is to meet the President of the United States of America. That really is not my finest achievement to date. I don't mean the meeting, I mean the flu. So if my voice is a little odd, forgive me. I thought it might be of interest, perhaps, if I began by setting a stage for you about a country like Jamaica and where it is at this moment. Like many developing countries, we have been on a learning curve. We've tried things, and one of the virtues of Jamaica is that it has always had a sort of experimental energy, been willing to try to find ways to get through this tremendously difficult problem of development. And I think that the second thing that's interesting about Jamaica is that it is already a sturdy, established democracy that can speak not of the new experience of democracy, but of an established democratic tradition. And that is very interesting, I think, in today's world, a young country that already can speak of a democratic tradition. So that in a sense, we've settled all the political arguments a long time ago. And when I see the present excitements in Eastern Europe and in Central America, I think to myself, well, we've been in the trenches of democracy for a long time, and I have more than once thought, as I looked at the new entrance to the field of democracy, I've often thought, welcome to the club. We've been there all along. Now, very importantly, if a country is to move from a settled political framework to achieve development, meaning economic growth, the ability to improve education, improve housing, improve health, the second thing it has to settle is an economic strategy. It has to try to make up its mind how we're going to get the economic side of things to work. And we have, I think, a singular advantage at this time in that, having settled our politics in the sense of systems, we have reached, I think, a remarkable degree of consensus about economic development. We have been through various experiments in state intervention in economic activity. We have always believed in a powerful private sector, but we've had periods when we thought we could work the mix, get an advantage out of a mixture. Experience taught us that the government's just not very good at production. And experience taught me that if you try to achieve shortcuts by putting government into aspects of production for whatever reason, that what you do is set up tremendous contradictions inside the society. It creates fear and confusion in the minds of a private sector who you want to grow, but who, in a sense, don't want to grow if they feel there is a potential threat. I speak with total frankness. And certainly as part of my own rethink of economic strategy, I came to the conclusion, along with all the members of my political party, that what we want is, one, for our private sector to have the job of economic development. Secondly, that the government should never be in an adversarial position with the private sector, but to work very closely with them to create the conditions that most favor economic growth. That the business of the government, and believe me, it is as much as we can do successfully, to work on infrastructure, human resource development, training, trying to find the means to support low-cost housing, developing effective health services, and to provide a framework of broad social justice. Now, we've settled that in Jamaica. There's a broad two-party consensus about it, and I think there's a national consensus. And in coming to Washington in response to the President's kind invitation, I asked major leaders of our private sector and our trade union movement to come with us because it is a common agenda. And they have been of enormous assistance in this meeting, talking to financial institutions, business people, while we, on the government side, have done the official round. And also, it is a way of us saying to the world that this is a united country interested now in development. I think that Jamaica is on the verge of a remarkable economic takeoff. The will is there, the know-how is there, the private sector wants to move, tourism is moving, bauxite alumina is beginning to move upwards again, non-traditional export development is beginning to improve, and we even achieved 5% growth in our GDP last year. But we face tremendous obstacles, one in particular, and the obstacle is the problem of foreign exchange. In all the years of the past, Jamaica ended up, as indeed many countries in the world have, very, very heavily in debt. Our debt is 4.5 billion, which is the equivalent of nearly 2 years' gross domestic product. The servicing of that debt takes more than 40% of our foreign exchange earnings, and the financing of the servicing of the debt takes more than 40% of the national budget. So that we face two huge problems. From the government's point of view, such enormous sums of the budget are used to finance the servicing of the past, the servicing of the debt, that our capacity to maintain a dynamic, forward-moving educational system that keeps in step with modern technology, that can begin to give us our own indigenous research capacity, is severely hampered. Our ability for economic growth, ironically, is severely hampered. Many people don't understand that you cannot expand a business in a country like Jamaica if you don't have foreign exchange. You can't make the basic machinery. You have to import it. So if you want to expand a plant, you have to have the foreign exchange to pay for the foreign machinery, and so on and so forth. And very often now we're trapped in a situation, and we face that in a very serious way in the immediate 2 to 3 years, is that when a private sector firm is excited with a plan of expansion or to get into a new line, it has to come to the central bank for the foreign exchange for part of what it wants to do, and then they have to join a queue before they can get the foreign exchange, so that we are denied the growth, they become frustrated, we lose the employment opportunities, and the whole thing becomes trapped in a frustration. Now, I'd like first of all to say, why should an American citizen have any interest in that? Why should it not be shrugged off as your problem, somebody else's problem? And then I'd like to discuss afterwards things that we think can do to help, and why we are here, really. I think that more and more we really occupy a single global economy. Very many Americans, I think, and very many people in the more developed parts of the world don't recognize that when a large part of mankind is trapped in this debt problem, when we in Jamaica want to expand something in agriculture, but need more tractors to expand it, those tractors can logically come from you. If we can't bring them in, then you don't export them. And I often think it is ironic that the United States, with all its economic power, should have a balance of trade problem, and you have an acute balance of trade problem, and it impacts on your society. And you're suffering that when there's a whole globe that is dying to import your goods, dying to bring in the tractors from Detroit or wherever, dying to bring in the equipment, but is trapped in the common problem of foreign exchange and is unable to do it. So that there is a first absolutely direct connection that affects jobs, your own trade situation, and our difficulty. They are interconnected. It is a global economy. That is the reality. There is great interest, for instance, in the common struggle against drugs. You are beginning to tackle it, thank God, very seriously in America. We treat it as a massive national priority in Jamaica. To us, it's life and death to us. Drugs can overpower any chance that we have of building a decent society. But to the extent that we get trapped in continuing poverty, it is easier for the drug barons to penetrate us and use us. It is harder for us to finance the interdiction processes, to build the intelligence services, to run the massive national educational campaigns for demand management. All those things become harder for us. And so, even at that level, there is a commonality. One could go on through problems of environmental development. All these things impact on each other. And as always, the problem with the world is that the obvious difficulties are often not exciting. They don't make news. And it's the old story of dog bites man and man bites dog. In a sense, Eastern Europe, this triumphant development for democracy in Eastern Europe is like a man bites dog. My continuing problem of foreign exchange is just dog bites man. How do we get people to understand that both are important and all of them are part of what we need to do to try to get the world to go forward and for us to be a part of that going forward? Now, we have looked at the immense pressures on the United States that come from the challenge of democracy in Eastern Europe. And of course we understand that the United States and Western Europe have got to move in to help consolidate a tremendous forward movement, which we welcome as much as anybody else. Of course we understand that a shattered Nicaragua, a shattered Panama have got to be a primary claim on resources to help rebuild all of that. So our approach is very straightforward. We say firstly to this administration and to the American people, we say, go to those challenges, which you must, and we understand. But please don't finance them by diverting resources from us to them. We've been there all along. We're your neighbors. We're your friends. Don't divert from us. You have the capacity between Western Europe, between the United States, Canada, and Japan to handle those challenges incrementally. It does not have to be at our expense. It would be short-sighted to do it at our expense, And it is absolutely wrong to do it at our expense, because we are a part of the whole need to go forward. And I'm happy to say that I feel that the U.S. administration clearly understands and supports that diversion is wrong. On the other hand, we're realists. Where I have a tremendous foreign exchange problem, I can say, for heaven's sake, don't make it worse. But on the other hand, I can't come and say, Chip, please find another $100 million to make it better. I can't ask you to throw money at our problem because the money's not there. And I know that. I can ask that you help us fight drugs. Help us finance our part of the drug fight, because that's an absolutely common problem. And I am asking that, because it is as much in your direct interest as ours that we succeed. But beyond that, I can't ask for extra. So what have we really come to do? Our own careful analysis in Jamaica shows that our problems don't necessarily have to be met by throwing money, although that is the easiest way merely to increase the foreign aid by so many tens or twenties or whatever of millions. There are other ways. And we feel that what is the common challenge at this time is to apply our imagination and our ingenuity to what already exists without asking taxpayers for more money. Without asking taxpayers for more money. And we've looked at two things in this that are very important and possible. Let me illustrate the first of them. As you know, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, set up by Bretton Woods many years ago, are the two primary sources of foreign exchange and development assistance. They exist to help everybody go forward. They have no other purpose or rationale in life. That's what they're there for. They very properly require and demand that if they're going to be a source of help, that you must deserve that help. And that means run prudently managed economies, all those things. Those arguments have been settled years ago in the world. There's no argument about that we can't just spend money regardless of our tax base, that we can't just run up deficits if we feel like it, that we have to have export-led growth, that we have to create the conditions of a dynamic market economy. All those things are settled. Yet, the rules under which they operate are so rigid, so strict, that we are trapped as follows. Let me take you back to the structure of debt. For some countries, commercial bank debt formed the major part. That's the classic Latin American situation. Your Brazils, your Mexicos, Venezuela. But for some other countries like Jamaica, we have very little commercial bank debt, perhaps 10% of the total. 45% of our debt is with bodies like the IMF and the World Bank. The other 45% is government-to-government debt with the US, Canada, and so on. So when Secretary Brady makes what we regard as a really significant breakthrough in the concept of dealing with debt, his proposal deals with commercial banks. And if you're one of the countries for whom commercial bank debt is the larger part, it is of enormous assistance. For a country like us, it has no particular significance at all, because if 10% is affected, that really is minuscule. So we turn then to the IMF and the World Bank, since that's the bulk of our debt, and they are supposed to be the source of development assistance. You would think, well, surely we can get a comparable assistance there. What we find is that by their rules, they cannot reschedule. They are not allowed to stretch out payments in any form. And so our country, with enormous energy, will to grow at this moment, finds itself paying more to the World Bank and the IMF than we can get from them. Between last year and this year alone, the net transfer of resources in debt repayment over any new thing we can get is going to cost us $208 million US. And in the context of our economy, that is massive. That is a huge drain on our resources. So we say, surely that is madness. That a country is on the verge of takeoff. It can go, it wants to go, it's disciplined, it's tough, it's courageous, and it is just trapped in a huge outflow of foreign exchange to the IMF and the World Bank. And I'm not quarreling with the IMF and the World Bank. I'm not talking about them. They don't make the rules. Those are the rules under which they have to work. So we have said to this administration, and say here, that if we put our mind to this, if we see ingenuity as the key to what we must now do, surely we can find a way to deal with that problem. Surely we can rethink the whole thing and make some modification in the arrangement so that we might at least be neutral rather than minus $208 million and just take longer to pay it back or make other kinds of arrangements to deal with it. So that's one of the things. The second thing that we have looked at is this. The U.S. Congress and administration made an arrangement many years ago that permits U.S. corporations operating in Puerto Rico to enjoy a tax break on their profits if those profits are left in Puerto Rico. The purpose of it was to encourage the reinvestment of profits, first in Puerto Rico, and later by agreement in the Caribbean, and finally in the Caribbean Basin group of countries as part of a CBI facility. That fund now stands at $18 billion. It is almost impossible to get those funds to move. They're so entangled in bureaucratic requirements, in underwriting requirements, etc., that it is really like drawing 6 impacted wisdom teeth to get a few dollars out of it. And so we have a whole region desperately in need of development capital, with many projects that are viable and sensible that could go, that are now trapped looking at that money and can't spring it loose. So we've been saying, let's put our mind to it, our ingenuity. It don't cost anybody any more money. Just be imaginative. We must be able to find ways to open that tap into viable projects of private sector development, refinancing, whatever it may be. Now, those are just examples of how ingenuity can get through. And really, therefore, I would say that this mission was a plea for common sense, not to divert, stand with your friends. We're not really asking for more money, other than perhaps for drugs, but let's put our brains to work on this problem. That's why I'm here, and I think we got a very positive reception, and I certainly am very appreciative to the U.S. government for making this visit possible, and I thank you all for being here.
Bill Grayson, Las Vegas Business Press. I noticed that your country recently signed an agreement with Venezuela for some assistance in enlarging your oil refinery. Is there any chance that Venezuela could give you assistance in exploring for oil, or that you have any oil potential in your area?
I wish I could brightly say yes. No, we've done a lot of oil exploration. In my first term, which seems almost to have been in another century, we did quite a lot of oil exploration. There were, I would say, not more than mild geological signs, but they've all come up negative. I'm afraid there's no easy way out through that. Life would be a lot simpler if there were.
From Inside US Trade. I'm wondering, what was the response you got from the administration to your proposal? Specifically, have you set up any procedures to further explore these proposals to see what can be done?
Yeah, one always hesitates to speak from one side of a discussion because there are proprieties. But let us say that I am satisfied that an adequate follow-up process is going to be put in place. Not to say that that means that it's going to have a result. Let me be careful. Nobody can promise a result in a matter of this sort. What we find is that we're going to try and explore what can be done.
Ann Orleans, Washington New Observer. Mr. Prime Minister, what was Congress's reaction? You visited on the Hill. Well, how did they react to your proposals?
But our impression is that more and more there is an attention focusing on the fact that there really is something crazy going on about the debt problem, that it's idle to talk about how it arose in the past, that what you're now dealing with is a common problem. As you know, people like Senator Bradley have been interested in this for some time. I know that Vice President Quayle has shown a lot of interest in it. And I think there is a growing sensitivity in Congress. Not that anybody is yet quite clear how to do it, but that if we put our minds to it, it can be done, and that something needs to be done. And where also there is, I think, very positive response, partly because it's easier to deal with, is over the 936 money, that 18 billion. I think everybody agrees it's just lunacy to just look at a mountain of $18 billion that's supposed to be invested and is just sitting down earning interest. You know, that really is not right.
Hamdi Fuad, Al-Ahram newspaper, Cairo, Egypt. Mr. Prime Minister, do you support the idea of an international conference, summit conference, for the rich and poor countries to meet and discuss the new strategy for debts and debt servicing?
Well, let me put it this way. When the Commonwealth, when the 50 nations that make up the Commonwealth, with Britain, Canada, and all the rest of us, had our last summit in Kuala Lumpur last year, Jamaica made a very carefully thought-out proposal, not for a general summit first, because truly nobody will come to that. And if you try to call a general summit, everybody will say, well, to discuss what? What's the agenda? You know, it all can become a sort of hopelessly unfocused and biggest danger, essentially rhetorical exercise. That's a total waste of everybody's time. So what we proposed was that the world needs to face the fact that there are some technical problems. They don't affect ideology. They're nothing to do with that. They're just to do with the practical blocks in the way of a quicker rather than a slow economic development. And our concrete suggestion was that a small group of the creditor and debtor countries, which is very easy to work out if there's the desire to do it, could set up an expert committee that ought to include some top financier economists of the creditor countries, the debtor countries, representatives of the IMF, representatives of the World Bank, and give them a period of, say, 3 months or whatever, to sit down and see if they can define a manageable agenda of highly concrete things that could be dealt with, and very much observe involving World Bank and IMF, who are critical to the whole process. And that if they could design an agenda of that kind, you then could get things that the G7, who are meeting in Houston in June, could look at, the group of 24 could look at, our groups could look at, and then begin a process of diplomatic discussion in which you might almost inch by inch settle things that could be done somewhat better. As a matter of interest, the Commonwealth group adopted the proposal. Places like Canada were very strong in their support of the proposal. And I think it's better really to let the Commonwealth carry that ball and see what happens. It's going to be discussed, for instance, in Houston. I don't say what will happen, but I know Canada intends to raise it.
You have spoken to a number of people here who are Jamaican nationals or people who have come from Jamaica. Are you calling for a number of these people to repatriate?
Our position over that is twofold. Firstly, all Jamaicans, like almost all expatriate people, have a deep affection for home. On the other hand, they're away from their home for reasons, generally economic reasons. And so we always try to interest our people in coming home, provided we know there's something useful that they can do and get satisfaction from doing. In fact, what we've done is to set up in our government, to work with our private sector and our own public service, a sort of scanning procedure that sees where are their needs. Perhaps it's in engineering, in which case, you know, can we scout the U.S. universities for young graduates to see if we can interest them, because we know we can offer them good jobs that use their skills. So we're working on that aspect of it, but in a very pragmatic way. Secondly, we believe in self-help. I'm a strong advocate of self-reliance. And we look at the huge potential reservoir of what we would regard as migrant savings. Jamaicans abroad, Caribbean people abroad who save. They make a tremendous contribution to the American and Canadian economy. They work hard. They're successful businessmen, professionals, all sorts of things. Question is, how can we interest them in keeping some of their savings in Jamaica? Because those savings would represent foreign exchange and would help. And we've recently amended our law to provide that if a non-resident Jamaican puts some of their savings in Jamaica, first of all, they'll be guaranteed convertibility, so they can get it back out whenever they want. Secondly, that the interest that it earns will be tax-free, to have a strong incentive to save. And we are hoping that will produce quite a helpful accretion. Yes, ma'am.
Janza from the BBC. Last year you had $25 million taken away from Jamaica. How much have you asked for to help fight this drug war? I read somewhere that it was a comparable amount. Is that the case?
Yeah, we figure that it would cost us about $25 million to escalate our total drug struggle, which is rehabilitation, education, as well as interdiction and all the other aspects of it, and income substitution. So you have to find alternative ways of putting, you know, simple farmer folk to work on other things. And we figure it's about $25 million. And, you know, we say to the administration, we really would like you to help us with as much of that as you can. We've also asked them to help us set up a regional agents training center, which could be located in Jamaica, because we are very behind still in agent capability, in straight detective capability, etc. As to the particular funds, to be accurate, what actually happened was that there is an economic support fund from which countries like Jamaica had drawn benefit, particularly as a support in the foreign exchange crisis. And it wasn't a matter that was aimed at Jamaica in fairness. I get no joy out of paranoid delusions. I just deal with reality. What happened was that the entire fund worldwide was put under the hammer of a re-examination because of the new demands of Europe, etc., etc. Tragically, this component for Jamaica got caught in that. And some of it has been put back, and hopefully it'll be even better next year. And I think the big thing is, my impression is, I might put it this way, that when the whole huge explosion took place in Europe, I think it happened so fast that anybody who claimed they predicted it, I'm going to say I don't think you're telling quite the truth. We all knew it would happen, but that it would happen that suddenly, that fast, and that dramatically with such enormous sudden consequences, nobody could foresee. And when it happened, Congress particularly felt, my God, you know, this is a tremendous opportunity. We have to deal with this. The administration said, let's go back to square one and re-examine everything. And Jamaica and others got caught, and it hurt. But in fact, what I now find is a strong feeling that it really was wrong to reduce what goes to a country like Jamaica, and that they're going to start to work it back up. Yes, ma'am.
Can I follow up? How severe is the problem of trafficking through Jamaica? Not the indigenous growth of marijuana, but now the traffic of cocaine through Jamaica.
That's the more worrying problem. They picked up, I can say a word about that if I may, because it really is gruesome. What they did, first of all, was to discover, with all the criminal corporate skill at their command, that the ganja roots, the old-time marijuana roots, might be a clever cover for the transshipment of cocaine. And so I think they began, all the intelligence suggests that long before we even knew it was happening, that they were slipping the cocaine through the ganja roots. First consequence of that was to unite into a single criminal corporate structure, the ganja and the cocaine operation, which is now indistinguishable. They're just subdivisions of a corporate enterprise. Secondly, it occurred to them that the best way to defend the route was to get some people interested in protecting a local market. So they began to push cocaine into what would otherwise be a rather trivial market, so small. But the minute they have some cocaine pushers who are now making big bucks out of pushing cocaine locally, they build an army to defend the route and to defend the process, because that army now, they're the gold chain people now. So they have all the interest to fight. And now it is a problem. It's not yet at all out of control, which is why we're trying to act hard and early to get on top of it. But it is a problem not only of transshipment, but of selling crack and cocaine now and trying to get the high school kids stuck on it and everything. It may interest you to know that we're one of the first small countries that has already started to introduce in our syllabus, our primary school syllabus, actual courses against drug use. It's actually part of our primary syllabus, and I hope by the end of next year it will be universal in the entire primary, secondary, and tertiary systems. That we're supporting the attempt to build a drug-free population, because in the end, it's only when you control your demand, and I pray that you do, we control ours, that we're going to finally lick that problem.
Sir? You.
Yes.
Rob Warren from the Cree Economic Institute. Mr. Prime Minister, the U.S. Senate is considering the Caribbean Basin Initiative number 2. Would you care to evaluate the Reagan administration's proposal, CBI 1, and how it's impacted on Jamaica, and your views on how it might be improved?
Yeah. Firstly, I think that the CBI is a very sound and valuable concept, which everybody supported. I was not one of the people who suffered any disappointment over it, because I was not one of the people who cherished any wild hopes of what it could achieve. Obviously, what market opportunity can achieve takes time. There was originally great difficulty arising from the fact that it seemed to be so easily cancelable, so much subject to the whims of lobbies and how Congress might react, that I think people were very cautious about it. And I think the fact that it was for a certain period of time was almost disabling, because, you know, what are people going to risk investments when the whole damn thing may be canceled in 10 years? You know, how do people know? That's just not a good way to stimulate investment. I'm not criticizing anybody. I think the original concept was put one way and eventually got watered down another way. But nonetheless, it has provided opportunity that has led certainly to certain economic growth, export growth, because of the trade advantages, and we benefited from that. Now, CBI 2 has this great advantage, which we frankly, Jamaica is the first country that began to talk to people like the Pickles Committee, etc., that the first disabling element was the time limit. That unless it was a rolling thing that people could feel they could plan on into the future, it would not be as effective as it might. So we're very pleased that that element is going to be removed. We're very disappointed that the attempt to extend it to things like the apparel industry, footwear, etc., has been defeated by the lobbies. And we really find this understandable politically, but extremely short-sighted. Because the fact of the matter is that when a CBI works, when you find devices that encourage free zones and, the sort of tail-end activity for things like textiles, number one, the very fact that growth takes place here involves growth and jobs for you. Even the equipment's probably going to come from you, first point. But what people are now beginning to realize is that it has a direct job advantage for America in the textile industry itself. Let me tell you exactly why. The problem of the United States apparel industry has nothing to do with Jamaica. We will never in a million years be able to produce enough to affect one firm. We're just not big enough. Though it has huge implications for us. Your problem is the Pacific Rim, or India, places like that, who are the big low-cost producers. How do you compete? What we've discovered is that if an American manufacturer keeps part of his relatively high-cost operation in the USA, but puts a rather labor-intensive side of that activity at the much lower labor cost of Jamaica, their average cost comes down, and they are then able to compete. And your own studies put out by your Department of Commerce indicate that right now 70,000 jobs have been either created or saved in the U.S. apparel industry because of this kind of arrangement, like with 807 and things in the free zones in the Caribbean region. How to get this through to the unions and the apparel industry is a matter that still defeats us. But frankly, I think they're just short-sighted because it's almost a knee-jerk reaction. A job abroad is a job lost. When I think the job abroad here is a job saved. Back short.
Sir?
Bill Rogers, Voice of America. Mr. Prime Minister, I understand your government plans to establish or reestablish relations with Cuba. Have you already done so, and are you sensitive to, or do you believe Washington would be concerned if you did indeed establish relations with Cuba?
No, I suppose we will get around to that at some point. We have always said when we had our election, we campaigned on the basis, number one, that we recognized that the whole Cuban thing had been completely escalated out of all sense and reason, that it had become, although it was a perfectly innocent relationship, that it wasn't perceived as such. And it did cause a lot of tension, quite unnecessary tension with Washington and at home. So we made the point that, as a matter of principle, we think that we, like Mexico, Venezuela, everybody else, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, should have formal diplomatic relations, but we don't ever intend to allow them to become a source of either internal or external tension again. And in due course, we will get around to it in a modest and controlled way because we think it is right in principle.
Follow-up on that. Was there any mention of the relationship with Cuba in your meeting with the president?
No.
Inside U.S. trade. Recently, there's been reports of talks on free trade agreements with Mexico and the United States, and most recently, when the Panamanian president visited, that came up in their discussions. Was there any talk of that in your conversations with the Bush administration? What are your thoughts on that?
Not directly, no. Though we're very conscious of that, we know that things are heading that way, and inevitably so. I think it's inevitable that will happen. As we become more globalized economically, that will happen. We were more speaking at that level of our own direct relationship with the United States, where, for instance, we have a special textile agreement that helps our textile industry and which I'm confident will survive all of these changes and be very important for us.
One last, if I may. In July, according to the American Human Rights Report, your National Security Minister announced that an independent body was going to be set up to look at allegations that there had been infringements or during violent crime with the police. What's the status of that independent body? Is it going to be set up?
Yes, that is going to be set up, because we do have a problem where there is a sort of small minority in the security forces, in the police force, who I think sometimes do not act with as complete a respect for citizens' rights as they should. I think that you have one of these problems where wherever there are criminal structures, and particularly with things like the crack gangs and stuff like that, where you get a difficulty in these relationships. And it is the great challenge, as you know, to a police force to hold on to all its discipline and its principles when it is sometimes under a lot of pressure. And so you have to have a balance over it, but we are going to look into things to see that that never gets out of control.
Is that in the near future?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry you're not feeling well.
No, it's all right.